Like so often I see people, I do it too, where we try to just like skip to the answers. It's like, oh, this is the answer I need. This is how I do life.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a second. Like, what's the question?
I wasn't accepting who I actually was at the time, and I was telling her she wasn't good enough.
And I realized like, oh, this is to specifically help with the question of depression that comes from a disconnection from a secure future.
I couldn't even fathom where I was going. I was in such a hole. I couldn't have imagined how great life was gonna get. Yeah, so this is Knowledge Gap. This is a podcast where I'm gonna be interviewing the people who have helped me throughout my life, and sometimes random strangers who have innate wisdom to share, because that's the thing with humans. We've all made it this far, which means that we have figured something out along the way. And I think it doesn't matter who you are, where you've come from. Everyone has that innate wisdom to share. And when I think of innate wisdom, the first thing I think of is Regina from Wellspring Coaching. Regina was the leader for my basically group therapy for 11
weeks.
11 weeks this time last year. And we talked on Friday about what we were going to talk about today. And all that is out the window in lieu of the fact that I am going through an emotional crisis that is very reminiscent of the one I was going through when I started your program last year. So we're just going to show the world Regina's chops when it comes to her ability to hold space, and it is a wonderful ability indeed.
Thank you, Zaelyn. Yeah, I got a phone call this morning like, hey, I'm not okay, and I think I want to use it for our conversation rather than just kind of like turtling or hiding or puddling. And I was like, you are so brave, and let's go. And I'm very excited to get into it. So what we thought was going to happen was going to be this like intellectual conversation about like, what is coaching? What is Wellspring? Like, why do we need coaches in the world of depression and disconnection? And then today we're like, oh, we're actually just going to do it. We're going to go back into Envision. We're going to go into the week 5, how do I take care of myself question. But before we do that, should I give some more context?
Yeah, let's talk about what Envision is, what Wellspring is, and how we found each other through it.
So yeah, Envision. First off, what is Wellspring? So Wellspring Coaching is my business. It's my brainchild. It's my heart child. It's many things that way. But my world is all about telling more whole and helpful stories of depression specifically, because the meds and therapy didn't work for me the way I needed them to. And so when I'm asking these questions of like, okay, like, why do I feel this way? Why am I stuck like this? There's a bigger story here. How do I learn to tell it, and how do I help with it? So Wellspring now is all about helping people rebuild their sense of self and their health after a trip through the depression pit, because it's this like big complex thing, the depression, not just a disease label or like a one-off thing. It's like, oh, what is this trying to tell me about being human? How do I understand myself? How do I take care of myself?
Yeah. The depression bit is really real. And when you're in it, it looks different for everybody. And we've talked about this, actually. We've visualized it at one point, I think, in the program. And for some people, it's slimy down there and you can't get a hold of the walls to pull yourself out. And for other people, it's just so deep you can barely see light. And everyone experiences it in a different way. But we all experience it at one point or another in our lives. So talking about it and having the vernacular and the language to talk about it in a safe space for those conversations to take place is exactly what Wellspring's goal was, based on my understanding.
And it was really interesting with Envision specifically, which is this group coaching program I've made. I made it 2 years ago now. And initially I was like weaving together my studies with coaching school and my background in neuroscience and anthropology. And I was like, okay, how do we like put all these pieces together to make this unique Regina creation in the world? And I had an idea about like, oh yeah, it's about self-development and self-growth. And then I started doing it, and I realized like, oh, this is to specifically help with the question of depression that comes from a disconnection from a secure future, which is something that Johann Hari talks about in his Lost Connections book. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, of course that is depressing when you're like, I don't have any hope about what's happening. I have no idea what's happening. I need the sense of control. But where the heck do I get that from?
Yeah.
And so I started doing these Envision groups and like being with people in the pit, and like you guys would bring your full selves to it. And I was like, yes, this is what this is really about.
Yeah. So Envision is the container within the container. It is the more streamlined approach to understanding depression in relationship to other people. Because I remember one of the things that was so impactful about being in the pit and being able to hear other people talk about their pit, which gave me more words to talk about my own. And when you do solo therapy, because I was in solo therapy for a very long time, very, very long time, and eventually I felt like I hit a wall. I hit this point where every week my therapist would be like, oh, you're my favorite client. Like, I love talking to you. Like, catch me up on everything. And it's like, this is a chat. This is not therapy anymore. This is just us talking or me venting. And also I know far too much about you now, so this is not working for me anymore. And then I found you, and I found this container that you were offering, and from day one it was so different. And I remember I showed up in a hoodie, and I showed up with a box of tissues, and I think I was holding a stuffed animal, and I was mad at the world, and I was so very sad. And in that space I was still welcome in your container. Like, you didn't make everyone turn the cameras on. You just said we could. And I was like, fuck it. I don't care what they think of me. And then I saw another girl also curled up in her hoodie, and I was like, okay, all right, cool. And it just became this thing that anchored me every single Thursday morning at 10 a.m. For 11 weeks. And I could show up happy, and I could show up sad, and I could show up and share stuff, and I could show up and be silent. And what I found myself doing by, like, I think the second or third week is I would always have something to say, because I would hear someone else say something and be like, I resonate with that. I hear your struggles, or I hear your joy. And it's like, yeah, I did have a win. And every single time, after every single session, you would send us this email. And these emails were the most thoughtful reflection of happenings throughout that session. I remember after the first one that you sent, I was just blown away with how much you noticed and how much you took in and everything you reflected back to me. So what did the email, like, when did you start doing
I brought one with
this?
me.
Yeah. Okay.
So, like, yeah, I can tell you when I started doing it, why I started doing it, how I started doing it. And then I did bring the week 5 one from your Envision group.
Oh, okay.
If we want to dive into it. But
Okay.
yeah, why I do the summaries the way I do is I was in my coaching program, and they were very, like, they told you how to do the coaching, but they didn't tell you how to do the notes. And so I was watching my classmates, like, what they kept track of, what they chose to write down. And I was like, interesting, like, what's the point of these notes? Is it, because when you go to the doctor's office, it's the charting, they call it charts, and they keep track of all this data, and it's very, the clinical. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this, like, stiff clinical thing. And, like, what am I actually here to do as a coach? And I use Krista Tippett's words. She calls them the words that shimmer. And so I'm sitting in the sessions, and I'm listening with my ears, but also this other sense that I have for, like, hey, what's the thing with that little effervescence to it? And then when I'm in the session, I write it down. Like, I have a little notebook with my scribbly handwriting, and I write down those shimmer words. And after the session, I sit there and I'm like, okay, what do we need to be able to access from this space when we're not in this space anymore? Because, like, so often you go to, like, these sessions, whether it be like body work or therapy, and you're like, oh my goodness, that was amazing. And then you leave and I forget. I'm like, oh, what did we talk about? Like, what did I learn there? And so I was thinking about these, like, we were having these super powerful coaching sessions where people were having these breakthroughs and like, oh my goodness, thank you. I've never thought of it like that. Like, this changes everything for me, or this changes this for me. And I was like, okay, like, let's capture that. But I didn't want it to be clinical, and I didn't want it to be stiff. And I also wanted people to have access to it. So, like, I got really annoyed when I'd go to therapy and I'd be like, hey, can I see your notes? Like, what are we talking about? And they would never show me. And I'm like, oh,
that's about me though. Yeah. Like, why don't I get to know about me?
Yeah, I was like, hey, that's like my data. Can I, like, be in on this story? And so the co-collaboration of the summary is like, here's what I noticed, but it's all your words. Like, I'm not sitting there. Yeah. Like, sometimes I'll, like, reflect it and make it condensed into, like, 3 words instead of 20. And then I see how you respond. And if you lean in and you're like, yes, that's what I'm talking about, I write down those words. And then after the session, I sit there and I type it up like it's a letter from in session to out of session. and I use it, like I use second person. So I'm like, you said this, like this is what we talked about. And it's just this, I don't know, probably 500 words, 3 paragraphs. Sometimes they're longer. Sometimes I'm like, we have a lot to get down. And it's just this insight of the words that shimmer to hold on to. I think of it like a talisman or a time capsule.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like if we get into the one from last year, how it still resonates this year.
Yeah, definitely. Oh,
yeah, I just talked
this
a lot.
time last year. No, it's good. This time last year, man. This time last year, week 5. And this was the week all about self-care work. And I remember this week was one of the homeworks that I did not do because Regina gives incredible homework in her courses, in her coaching sessions. And they're very well thought out. They're very well font selected as well.
Thank you. They're also intimidating.
And they are intimidating because sometimes they're 3 to 4 pages, and it's not one of those things where you can do, because believe me, I've tried, 15, 20 minutes before the session starts. It's something that like you look at on a Sunday, you think about on a Monday and a Tuesday, and you finally write something on a Wednesday, and then you find the answers in exploration with the group on Thursday. And
they're steepy.
Yeah, they're steepy. They're like they're like tea.
Mm-hmm. You gotta let it brew, and you're like, maybe I'll like open the package and smell the tea, and then I'll put it in there and like let it do its thing, and then it's a whole process. And it's deliberately built that way in that there's 10 sessions with content in them, and then thanks to Zaelyn, we have a catch-up week now. But it's all like, it comes from Rilke's idea of living the questions. Like so often I see people, I do it too, where we try to just like skip to the answers. It's like, oh, this is the answer I need. This is how I do life. Yeah. And it's like, wait a second. Like, what's the question? What am I trying to learn in the question, in the unknown, in the certainty,
in
uncertainty,
the uncomfortableness,
the uncomfortable, the discomfort?
Yeah.
And so each week is one of these living questions. And the first one is like, can you imagine? Like, can you even imagine a future that you're excited about or hopeful about or want to live? And just starting to play with that idea of like, oh, I don't have to hold so tightly. And as the weeks go, I've thought a lot about the order too. And it's curious. I said, it's just curious to see like which weeks people resonate with. But it's, can you imagine? Where am I and where do I come from? Mm-hmm. Who even am I? What really matters? How do I take care of myself? What do I even want? Why do I care about health? And where am I going?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And these ones I did in first person because my hope is that people read these session titles in their own voice.
Yeah. I did when you read them out loud. Mm-hmm. The last one stuck with me of where am I going? And I remember, I started Envision with you maybe like a week ago last year. And I remember reading that title of where am I going? Like, because I always like look ahead in true Hermione Granger form. I like the homework too. And I couldn't even fathom where I was going. I was in such a hole. I couldn't have imagined how great life was going to get after that last session ended, because I remember thinking, what am I going to do with my Thursdays at 10 a.m.? Like, where is my group going? Like, am I going to be okay out of this? Mm-hmm. And I was one of the lucky ones that we had forged a friendship. And I remember for the first 4 or 5 Thursdays afterwards, we still saw each other every Thursday at 10 a.m. We went on walks, we went on hikes. And looking back, I never would have guessed that I would be here a year later in a similar hole from where I started, but it's not as deep. And my heart is just as broken. Mm-hmm. But here we are. And a couple of weeks ago, I asked you, because your relationship with your husband is one of the healthiest, greatest things I have ever had the pleasure of witnessing. And it is something that I aspire to every time I see you guys together. Like, you have given me a model of this is what I want. Like, this is what I'm working towards, this level of friendship and just kinship and childlike play in relationship with the person that I love. And when I was really struggling in my relationship, I texted you and I asked, how do you take care of yourself in relationship? Because I am a big believer in the advice of never take wisdom from somebody whose life you don't want. And you are one of the few people in my life that I truly admire and look up to. And I wanted your thoughts. And now we're here back on week 5 for that self-care work. How do I take care of myself? How do I take care of myself in relationship? And this is where I'm going to pass the gauntlet to you so people can see what you're capable of when it comes to coaching.
Yes. Thank you for all of those kind words.
You're welcome.
And I think it just clicked for me that this podcast for you is about listening to the wisdom of everyday people, and then also that leaning into the wisdom of the people who have something that I want, or have a life that I want to emulate or use pieces of.
Yeah, we are all amalgamations of everyone we've ever met, every book we've ever read, and everything that's ever happened to us.
The mosaic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the question of how do I take care of myself? We'll dive into getting into some coaching space with it. But first I want to frame the question of self-care. That phrase, that word is one of, I think it's one of the most misunderstood words we have, where it's self-care. I polled people one time and I was like, when I say self-care, what does that mean to you? And they're like, selfish bubble baths was the answer. And I was like, I want a different word for that. But while I'm here in this English language, we're gonna roll with self-care and see what comes up. So within that, my favorite definition of self-care comes from Parker Palmer, and he talks about how self-care is stewardship of our gifts and our limits. And by that stewardship, he means respect and taking care, and not just the surface level care, but oh, this is honesty, this is grit, this is commitment to the limit of okay, here's what I'm capable of and here's what I'm not capable of, and that's okay. And then the gift of oh my goodness, this is what I'm really freaking good at. How do I give that? And that, my core values are coherence and service. So that coherence piece is about that stewardship of taking really good care of my gifts and limits. And then the service piece has that emergence to it. So okay, how do I share my gift? So it's all part of this ongoing conversation for me personally. And of course it shows up in my work, because this is where I pull that sacredness from inside of me and share it. This is how I'm trying to share my gifts with the world. So the question, how do I take care of myself, is a big one. Mm-hmm. It's a brave one. And it's ongoing.
It is. Mm-hmm. I remember from that session, one of the people in the group, after everyone talked about the bubble baths and the self-indulgences, someone said, doing the things that are hard because I know they're good for me. Like going to the grocery store when I don't have food in the fridge. Brushing my teeth when I am depressed. And it's that truly is self-care, because you don't have to. You can order takeout. You can not brush your teeth for days. And when you're in that pit, that slimy, swirly depression pit, it's so easy to convince yourself that you're not worth those things. So reframing self-care outside of indulgence, I think, is so important. And that definition that you just gave, that quote, was beautiful. And I think it did a really good job of that.
It brings in the component of self-trust and self-awareness, where it's okay, learning myself, what do I even like? What is important for me to do? What can I even take care of myself? Which is the process of becoming a mature adult, right? Being able to take care of yourself and others. And so learning how to do it, and then having the trust to keep doing it, and making those promises to yourself and keeping them.
Yeah. Not breaking the promises to yourself when you said you would.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard.
And so I call the homework for week 5, the question, how do I take care of myself? And then the homework worksheet is self-care work, because it is work in that you keep showing up for it and keep doing it. And the worksheet I frame with your gifts and your limits on the front and the back, because I want them to be juxtaposed together. And I want people to start with your gifts, and because we so often go to your limits first. So when you think back to week 5 of last year and where you are this year, what sticks out to you about your gifts?
The things I wrote last year, the things that describe me at my best, were things that were essentially what I could give to others. because I'm realizing now that I have a very big attachment to feeling worthy of someone and finding completeness in another person. So for me, taking care of myself was making sure that I was palatable for someone else, was making sure that I would be accepted. So that meant I would show up centered and calm and confident and capable. And what I'm realizing now is I valued those things because I couldn't do them. More often than not in my relationships, I show up as an emotional train wreck. I am good in pretty much every other part of my life except my romantic relationships and sometimes my friendships if they're close enough. And I remember thinking my weaknesses were the ways I actually were showing up. Dysregulated, unable to hold space for myself and others, unable to show up consistently, being flaky, not following through. And in that reflection now, like happening live, I wasn't accepting who I actually was at the time. And I was telling her she wasn't good enough. She wasn't capable of change. And until she wasn't worthy of being in a relationship, of being worthy. And I punished myself for the better part of a year. Like, I went through devout celibacy. I went through constantly telling myself, no, you can't do that. No, you can't have this until we're better. When you earn it, you can have it. When you start showing up. And sometime mid-June, mid-July, I realized that the reason why nothing was happening was because I wasn't letting it. Was because I was keeping myself in this stasis. I was keeping everything on ice until I felt like I was finally good enough. And I broke finally. I broke down, and that led to a breakthrough.
Broken open.
Yeah, broken open. And the things I wanted began to seep out. And I would see them in these little shimmers and these little flecks and these little glimmers of things that I would say to other people. And I realized that I was worthy of success. I realized that I was worthy of love. I realized that I was worthy of a romantic connection that I'd always wanted and I'd always dreamed of. And I just allowed myself to receive. Somewhere along the last year, my word of the year became reciprocity. Ooh. And I realized that there's more to the joy of giving than just giving. It is also the joy of seeing others give happily and receiving that without thinking you're unworthy. And so that's what I did. And people started showing up in droves to just give me things I had always wanted. Give me the opportunity to revisit a city that I thought had chewed me up and spat me out. Give me the opportunity to hone my body into something that would protect me and keep me safe so I didn't have to rely on other people.
Like truly safe.
Like truly safe. Like physical combat safe. And then one day, the most incredible man showed up to love me.
And you're like, what?
And I was like, you're not real. I made you in a lab. And that realization of all I have to do is let it come to me has changed me forever. And I know that this time, even though things feel the same, because that's what we talked about this morning, and that's the reason we're doing this now, because I feel like I'm in the same hole that I was this time a year ago. And I can't tell if it's because my body remembers what that was like and it's worried and it's concerned, or if I actually am and it's the end of the world all over again. But because of you and this course and myself and the work that I was willing to put in and the vulnerability that I was willing to have in so many parts of my life, I have like all of these tools now that I can pick up my phone and call you. A year ago, I never would have done anything like that. I would have been like, we're just going to move the podcast and I'm going to pretend like everything's fine for a couple of weeks. Then I'm going to retreat back into my hole and we're not ever going to do it. But fuck that. And now we show up. And we're here. And I'm crying. And we're going to put it on the internet. Yeah, we're going to put it on the internet.
So a year ago, you sat down to do this worksheet, and you're like, okay, my gifts are only the gifts of the things that I'm trying to be, not what I actually am. Mm-hmm. And then a year goes by, and you're like, no, like my gifts are who I actually am and what I actually am, and I can own those and get out of my own way and stop putting myself on ice.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, one of the things I realized in this most recent relationship was, at first, I wanted to be like him so badly. It was that very weird dichotomy of, do I want to be you or do I want to be with you? Uh-huh. And when I finally came to the conclusion that it was kind of both, I was able to take a look at what I actually bring. One of the things I love about him so much is that he's so funny. Like, he can make me laugh, he can make anyone laugh. And don't tell anyone, I had been struggling for the past year to do stand-up comedy. Like, I would go to all the open mic nights and I would do my thing and like 3 people would laugh and mostly like people's jaw would drop and be like, what the fuck did she just say in front of all of these people and God? Mm-hmm. And I thought it was like immersion therapy. Like, I'm gonna keep doing this hard thing that doesn't really fit me. Because it's good for me and it makes me grow. Like, I truly was the dandelion growing in the crack on the sidewalk. And I'm like, this is good for me. Stomp on me again. But I realized in figuring out, do I want to be you or do I want to be with you, that it couldn't be both. I had to be me and grow towards me in order for us to grow towards each other in that wonderful little dual tandem double helix of intertwiningness that I think healthy relationships need. And I realized that my gift, my true gift, is that I make people feel. I don't make people laugh. That's not the gift that I was given. I bring up big emotions in people with the things that I say and the way that I view the world and how I verbalize them. And because of so many people's reactions in the past, I viewed it as a bad thing, as the thing that I shouldn't do because it was wrong. But it's not wrong. It's just not funny.
It's this question of like right and wrong versus, oh, it's just a fit. This just fits.
Yeah.
And letting it be exactly what it is.
Yeah. And that acceptance, that radical acceptance, was very difficult for me when it comes to, like, I can accept the input from the outside world. When it comes to me and accepting the things about myself, radical acceptance is a tough one.
A year ago in the session 5 in the group, I was reading our summary, mm-hmm. and you shared a practice with the group about calling in a version of your older self. You called her the wise one. Mm-hmm. And you call the wise one in to help resolve situations. And in doing so, you're able to act with the wisdom and avoid burdening your child self. Mm-hmm. And so you are you're older than you were last year. And you're doing it right now.
Yeah. I was just, as you were reading that, I remember that. I am who I was talking to this time a year ago. Mm-hmm. Because there was a very big pivot for me in October of this past year, 2024. Yeah.
For some chronological time point, yes.
Yes, for 2024. This is 2025. I stepped into my mother. Like, I'm almost 30. I'm going to be 30 in a month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I made it to 30. I didn't think it would happen. But I accepted that, I can still love the aspects of the maiden, of the youthful vigor, but it's time for me to shoulder some responsibilities. It's time for me to step more fully into the version of myself that I've been looking up to, and to be that not just for my younger self, but for other people in my community, younger women, whoever wants to show up and listen. And that's one of the reasons I think we're here today, because I'm finally willing to be seen in all that I am.
Your self-care is maturing. Like you've become willing, which my favorite definition of what it means to surrender is just to become willing. To become willing to do the thing. And you've become willing to mature how you take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And you're doing it.
Yeah.
And it's not something you, like, there are parts of it that you actively think about.
Mm-hmm.
But most of it was very organic. You're like, oh, this is just how I am.
Yeah. It was like a lack of resistance,
Mm-hmm.
that being willing, that surrender. Eventually it was just like, oh, it is significantly easier to guide my raft through the currents than it is to paddle upstream. And I think a lot of that had to do with me trying to go back and fix these things about me that people from my past didn't like. And instead, when I got to the point of embracing them and moving forward with them willingly, that's when things really began to flow.
It's not about fixing these things that are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, why is this here? What is this like? How do I take care of it?
Yeah. How do I take care of me?
Yes.
How do I take care of all these parts of me that need things? And I think it just got to a point where, yeah, I had to become the mother.
I had to. It's that trustworthy voice. And another piece from our summary last year that stuck out to me this morning was, you've learned that it's hard for you to see yourself accurately. It's been interesting for you to see who gets to say when you're okay, and how often you've relied on voices that aren't yours to do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're the one who knows if you're okay or not.
Yeah. And those voices that tell you, hey, you're bad if you do this. Hey, society doesn't like that. You can't go that route. Those voices sound so much like your own for such a long time, until that one day, a louder, not in volume, but in strength, voice rings out and says, really? You want to do that? Are you sure? Okay, we'll do it.
So self-care is really cultivating that stronger voice.
I think so. It's about allowing that voice to be heard and then to actually act on it when it's scary. Like when you're given that option, that moment of, do I stay or do I go? Staying is going to hurt less in the beginning, but longer in the long run, and more intensely in the long run. And going now will hurt so much in this moment, but I know it's what the voice wants. I know it's what the voice wants for me. And I got really good at doing that in every capacity, except for in romantic relationships.
You kept yourself on ice in the romance department.
I did. I kept myself on ice until the romance. And, you know, we're very rapidly approaching a shift in humanity. And you can talk about it however you want to talk about it, in the form of politics or astrology or I don't know what else there is in the world, but something is happening and we're all feeling it. And it's kind of like we're going through a very tiny portal and you cannot take some baggage with you. And then you're left with the choice of, do I stay with my baggage? Or do I trust that when I go through that portal, I'm going to have everything I need on the other side? And it's going to be an upgrade. And it's going to be more fitting for the person that I've been wanting to be. So that old skin that I've been dragging around with me won't be so form-fitting. And all of the things that I've surrounded myself with won't feel so foreign. Because I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to go through there and get to the other side. And you think, like when you read about it in books or you see it in movies, you think it's so obvious to pick squeezing through that tiny portal. But in actuality, in day-to-day life, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're getting to see everyone you've ever been in that suitcase. And you say, hey, thank you for getting me here, but I have to go now. And that's so much harder in reality.
This weekend I was going through things and choosing what to donate and what to make new space with. And I was not expecting it to make me sad. And I was sitting there and I was like, sometimes it's hard to make space for new things. Often it's hard to make space for new things.
Yeah.
And being willing to sit in that uncomfortable, to feel the sadness, ask Logan for a hug, and donate the things.
Yeah. It's hard when it's things. It's hard when it's versions of you. It's hard when it's people you've loved. But what I have found, and I have the data to back this up now, and Regina and I are all about data, is that the more you do it, the sooner the change comes. The more space you make, the more that you accept your gifts to build that foundation and then shove everything else away and say, no, I will sit here and be a minimalist for the first time in my life and wait for the good thing to come, the faster it does.
I've watched like really great things happen for you really freaking fast. I'm like,
kind of
look at you
weird.
go.
Yeah, like, and the lesson I learned over the last 6 months, particularly, is that you can go through a portal and get everything that you have ever wanted. And then you're having it and you're holding it and you're smelling it and you're feeling it and you're dancing it. And it's like, oh no, this is not what I wanted. This does not fit me at all. How did I make this mistake? And then comes the rectification moment of, okay, how do I gently put this down? It's like I was trying on clothes at the store, and I'm not going to be the asshole who takes all the clothes and just dumps them on the ground with all the hangers going fuck all everywhere. I'm going to take all of the clothes and I'm going to put them back on the hangers and I'm going to put them on the rack to go be redistributed into their proper locations. And that takes time.
Well, that's respecting your limits. Like, respecting that it's not a good fit is a limit, and that's self-care. So when you do it respectfully too, like you hang it up on the hangers and put them back, it's that stewardship. And without that, then you don't have the care, and it's the indulgent, like immature, childlike tantrum.
Yeah. Of let me make this mess.
Yeah.
Let me make this mess. Let me revel in my mess. Like sometimes I just need to break something. Yeah. And I don't want to be that person. I'm trying really hard not to be that person, but
who even am I? Who do I want to be? Where am I going?
I want to be kind, and I want to be firm in my kindness. That's been a hard thing to learn.
Ooh, firm in my kindness.
Yeah, like I can set my boundaries without setting them with poison and fire. I can stand up for myself without putting someone else down.
The difference between firm and mean.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Realizing that, I think I realized that yesterday, actually, that there's a very big difference between firm and mean. But the last thing I really wanted to talk about when it comes to like the gifts that I've accepted is anger.
Ooh, tell me more.
And I think anger is something that a lot of people in the communities that we're from, which primarily is what I like to call the more woo community and the spiritual community, anger is demonized. Anger is looked at as the most unseemly emotion you can show, the most primeval. Am I saying that right?
Primeval?
I don't know.
I think so.
The most uncouth, we're going to go with uncouth emotion that you as a human can show. And I fucking hate that. I hate how anger has gotten this horrible rep as being bad, because it's not. Anger is agency. Anger is a response to your boundaries being crossed. Anger lets you know where those boundaries are. And while anger may not give you the best way to articulate them in the moment, at least now you know.
You know where that line is.
Mm-hmm. And so many times I see people say, let live and let light, or let love and let light. And it's just like, you cannot have light without the darkness. You cannot exist without that intrinsic balance that keeps us all spinning around the sun. It's inherently human to feel angry, just as it is inherently human to feel happy.
Well, and when it's demonized to feel anger in general, especially anger for other people, like, good fucking luck when it's anger with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that anger with yourself shows you where you've betrayed yourself and
Mm-hmm.
where you aren't taking care of yourself and what you need to do about it. And so, of course, it's like, okay, how do I feel anger? It's really easy when it's my little sister being like the most annoying little person I've ever had in my entire life. But it's different when it's like, oh, fuck, Regina, I broke that deep, deep promise to you,
Mm-hmm.
and you're fucking pissed about it. What do I do now? Like, my insides are not okay.
Yeah.
And learning what that's trying to tell me, like, what is that check engine light trying to get happen in my life?
I felt that check engine light today at the gym. I was running. I was trying to put all my sadness into my muscles. I was trying to run from my problems. And I just felt like I felt a hit of a long lost frenemy just like knock me in the back of the head. And it showed up like right below my heart, right in that stitch in my side. And the emotions just welled up of like, why did you forget about us? You promised you wouldn't. You promised you would be there. You promised you wouldn't leave us behind again for someone else.
You promised you wouldn't leave us
promised.
behind.
And I did. And I thought I wasn't. And I kept telling myself, no. You guys are coming with me. I'm not going to leave you behind. But so many times I could hear that voice, that strong voice that lifted up above everyone else and said, hey, this is not for you. Not this way.
Mm-hmm.
I know you want it to be, but it's not. And I said, no.
I am going to leave you behind. Mm-hmm.
And I told her to shut up and sit down. I got this. And now we pay the piper.
You're like, oh, this is what I got. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I got what I signed up for.
It comes back to this, like, always the creator, never the victim. Even when it's so easy to be like, well, I am a victim right now. And it's like, oh, how did I actually create this situation for myself to teach me this specific thing at this specific time?
Yeah, I created this entire environment in which I am now dwelling in. So, you know what? If I think it's fucked, who is to blame but me?
And then also recognizing that fact without turning around and being mean to yourself.
Oh, man, I wanted
That's
to be.
what I'm working on, too. Is like, oh, my goodness, I made this for myself. Piece of shit. And it's like, no, I'm also learning.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. I'm learning, and that's fine.
Yeah. Learning to have that gentle empathy with yourself when you feel like the world is over because of shit you did. Oof. Like, I had a really, really hard time with like physical self-harm. And that's one of the reasons why I truly believe that anger gives you agency. Because all the times I wanted to fight back against my abusers, I wanted to fight back against the people who were harming me, and I didn't. Now I want to hit and fight and bite and claw at myself. And I can feel it in me, and I can see it in my mind's eye. Like the way it would feel to actively like leave bruises on myself. And how good it would feel in the moment to just do something about it. But somewhere along the line, I realized I have to live with that. I have to look back and say, I did this. And it's gotten to the point to where that is not worth it anymore to me. I would rather sit with the emotional discomfort and the emotional hurt and the emotional pain and say, where is this coming from, baby? Like, where, like, what's going on? Like, what does it feel like? That's my go-to. What does it feel like? It feels like the world is ending. Okay, that's not really an emotion, but that's valid. What does it feel like? It feels like my heart hurts. Okay, why? Because you gave it away again, and you didn't leave enough for us. So we're sad. And we're mad.
This is how we feel when we don't leave enough for us.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Francis Weller talks about how depression is often compressed grief. So it happens when we can't process all this grief, or we don't, or we choose not to. And now I'm thinking about, like, is compressed anger that, like, self-hatred or self-harm? Like, is there a component in there? Like,
I think so. I think it's sadness.
mm-hmm.
I think the more you squish anger down, the more it just becomes this deep, powerless sadness. Because there's one thing to say about like processing grief, and I call it digesting grief. Because like, you know, just like with overeating, like I can shove as much in as I possibly can, but eventually you get to a point to where it makes you sick. And you have to just sit in the uncomfortableness and wait for it to digest and wait for it to process through. And if you don't, you get indigestion. You have to deal with those consequences. The consequences will always be there. It's just about how you choose to accept those consequences.
That's what I call skilled mastery in my little session, week 5 summary or intro, where it's like, oh, how do I navigate this? Like, what do I know about myself and what do I need and how I go through?
And you just have to learn.
You get to learn.
You have to learn about yourself. Yeah, you get to. It is a privilege. It is a privilege and an honor to learn about myself every single time I do this, because I do it a lot.
It's also a pattern that a lot of people live where like you'll be at the bottom of the pit feeling nothing, and then the first emotion you feel again is anger. And that's how you know when you're coming out of the pit, is when you get angry again.
Oh, I love that. I love that. This is the first time I think in my entire life that I've allowed myself to be angry and let other people see my anger.
Ooh, letting other people see your anger.
Yeah.
Ooh, yes.
And that, honestly,
Brave.
that is one of the ways that I met my partner. Was I just got really mad in a place full of people who thought being mad was so wrong. And there was just this one person who was like, I love this. Do you want to come and beat the shit out of a punching bag with me? Do you want to come do that? Because we can do that like right now. And we did. And it was just so refreshing to have another human being say, not only do I see you in what other people have termed to be your worst moment, but I see it and I like it.
I see the gift in it.
I see the gift in it. And that made me see the gift in it. And since then, I've just kind of let my anger unleash. And it didn't come out how I thought it would. It didn't come out as this thing that consumed me and everyone around me. It came out as this timid little trickle who was like, if I throw this plate on the floor, is anybody gonna yell at me? And I'm like, no. And so you throw the plate on the floor and it breaks and then nobody yells at you and you don't yell at you and you're like, ah, well, shit. I guess I'll clean up the plate now. That felt great. I loved that. Let's do that again.
Yeah, the expression and then the natural consequence of like, oh, I just have to sweep this up. And
Yeah.
that's all.
I chose those consequences. I'm not mad about them. No one else is around to be mad about them. Do you want to break this glass? We went through a lot of dishes shortly after me discovering this part of myself.
I think it makes total sense that you're exploring this question of like, how do I take care of myself in the context of relationship? Because like it's who am I and whose am I? You can't separate those questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like showing up authentically in my relationships now. I did not realize how hard it would be to undo so many years of conditioning, so many years of contorting myself, and so many years of placating other people in order to keep myself safe. But since learning how to defend myself physically and learning how to take care of myself emotionally, to a point, still need help sometimes, I'm not afraid of upsetting the people I love anymore. Except for romantic relationships. We're still working on that one.
The growing edge. One of my sneaky agendas with Envision is getting at this question of security and like, what does it actually mean to be secure? What does it actually mean to be safe?
Okay.
So often it's like financial security, and it's like that outward focus of I'm safe if all of these other people aren't upset with me, or if all these other people aren't dysregulated, or like because somehow I can control that. And it's like, no, I can't control if other people are dysregulated. So that true security is an inside job. And how do we go inside? That's what all of these questions are about. All of these weeks are about. And then doing it in a group is like, oh, this is what real security feels like with other people, because it is still a relationship thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's coming back online and being yourself while being seen. And not being afraid of the outcome of that.
Or being afraid, but being willing to be afraid anyway.
Okay, yeah, letting the fear live here,
Yeah.
but not run the show.
It's like, fear, you're not in the driver's seat. You can sit in the back. You can scream. It's okay. I'm driving.
You cannot throw me in the trunk anymore and take over. No, no, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Liz Gilbert talks about like putting fear in the back and then like you being in the driver's seat and just letting them have their feelings.
Yeah.
You're welcome, but I'm not going to let you drive.
Yeah, well, my therapist, right before I started working with you, told me, like, you have grown up enough to where now you can take care of all of the parts of you that still haven't. And sometimes that feels like a teacher coming back from maternity leave. And it's like, I just got done raising this baby, but now I have 14 children to take care of. How am I going to do this? And I asked her, I was like, how do I do this? And she said, you just do. Because they're yours.
Well, you listen and you know because it's you.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Eventually you get to this point where it's like, I can hear like the different voices of me. At least I can. I can hear the different voices of me and what they need. And you learn how to respond to them. Like, this one likes to watch Studio Ghibli movies and eat a cheese and cracker plate. And I don't know why. It probably has something to do with my childhood, but that will help right now. This one likes to go outside. This one likes... And you just, eventually though, and I think this is the most important piece, all of those parts of you begin to become one with you as you become more and more integrated into yourself and into your authenticity and into the acceptance of the fact that it has always been me. Every time I have been saved, it has always been me saving myself. And it has to be me moving forward.
It's always been me, and it always will be going forward. I also want to point out that the getting to take care of each one of those selves isn't this like generality. There were very specific examples you gave. It's the cheese plate, it's Studio Ghibli, and that's true for your present self too.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are those incredibly specific pieces that are me? Like, what is this authenticity? Because we talk about authenticity and integrity and honesty, and these are all like lofty ideals that like, what does this word even mean? And then you look at it and it's, oh yeah, I eat Studio Ghibli. I watch Studio Ghibli while eating a cheese plate. And that's for yours. Mine's different. Everyone is different.
What's one of yours?
Ooh, lately it's been hot tamales.
Okay.
Whenever I want to feel like in my body again, I eat something cinnamon flavored.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's been really good for me. And then also listening to an audiobook with my eyes closed.
So your imagination can take over and
Yep. And especially in the middle of like a work day where I have a bajillion things I could be doing and I'm like getting tangled in it. I'm like, I'm just going to go take a little snoozle with my book.
I love that you can do that. That's fantastic. So the little ways that we take care of ourselves are going to be different for everyone. And I think that's really important to remember. And you can listen to this podcast. You can listen to the clips that are going to come from it. And you can listen to all the self-help gurus out in the world. And you can take bits and pieces for your mosaic. But ultimately, it's still an inside job.
Mm-hmm.
You have to figure out what works for you because you're the only one who knows.
Yeah,
you
you're
try
the-
things on, hang them up when you're done. But you're the only one who knows.
You're the artist, you're the architect, you're the person who gets to put the pieces together and decide how they go together.
Yeah.
And be angry about them when they don't fit.
Be angry about them. Sometimes you can break them down and try to make them fit that way. I haven't figured that one out yet, though. So as we come to a close in the understanding that everyone is different, how can anyone who has listened to things that we have said and talked about today and resonated with them find you to work with you?
So if you want to find me via social media, it's Regina. Well, it's not Regina. It's on Instagram, and it's Wellspring_coaching. I also have a YouTube channel, which is just Wellspring Coaching, and Substack. So those are the media ways to get in touch with me. If you want to be in real life with me, the easiest way right now, if you, especially on a budget, is the third Thursday of every month I do a free circle. It's called Definitely Not Therapy, Mental Wellness for Creatives with Walnut Street Publishing at Clear Story Arts, Thursday 6 to 7, the third Thursday of every month. And then if you find any of those locations, all of my links are very available. I'd love to talk to you. I love hearing everyone's stories. Like, that's why I do what I do. And so I know it's intimidating to like schedule a call with somebody to talk about depression, and it's one of my favorite things to do. So the invitation is there.
That's awesome. And just to be clear, one more time, where is the third Thursdays thing?
It's at Clear Story Arts from 6 to 7 on the third Thursday of every month.
Okay. And that's here in Chattanooga.
In Chattanooga.
Tennessee. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
And then Envision is going to gear up again in March, the first week of March.
Ooh.
So
New
get
cohort.
ready for that. Yes.
So how many people are you looking for?
Max 12.
Okay. Then it sounds like if people want to work with you, that's a really wonderful place to start. That's where I started.
Yes, it's a great place to start because it's a group, which means you're going to show up with other people. And because it's a group, it's also more budget friendly. And so if you're like, I really want to do coaching, I really want to get into this space, but like, oh my goodness, how do I do that? The group's a great place.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll have that all in the description. I want to ask one question to you guys.
Okay.
For all the people like me and you guys who have struggled and really resonate with your journey, what advice would you give them if they haven't figured it out yet? You know?
Like the first advice for the first step.
Yeah, let's do that. Or general advice, you know.
Yeah.
You could just say, go to one of my courses.
I mean, that is always an option, going to one of my events or working with, but even before that, it's this level of honesty with where, like, because I'm always going to be a little abstract, it's this question of identity. So it's like, who do you think you are now, and who do you want to be, and like, how do you freaking get in touch with that? Are you a journaler? Are you a verbal processor? Are you like what's your thing? And then are you doing the thing? And so if you are doing the thing, great, what's the next step? And so taking that, like making the space to actually sit down and look at it head on rather than running around it. So like specifically with depression, it's like, do the pit check. Like, where in the pit are you? Are you on the edges? Are you in the middle? Great. If you're in the middle, what's the thing that would get you from here to here, here to here? If you're on the edges, do you want to stay there? Or what would be the thing that gets you from here to here? So take stock, where are you? And then what's the action? Like actually writing it down and doing it. Because knowing better and doing better are two different things.
Yeah. Knowing better and doing better. I love that quote. Was it Maya Angelou? Mm-hmm. Now that I know better, I do better.
That's the goal.
That's
and sometimes
the goal.
you get
It is
sticky.
lofty.
Yeah.
It is a lofty goal because there is this little bit of cognitive dissonance between that realization part and then that first step. And it's that same feeling of knowing you should brush your teeth and not being able to get out of bed and do it. And sometimes it gets so bad it takes an external force. So for me, my first step was asking someone, can you help me? Mm-hmm. And that question, actually verbalizing it out loud to another person, changed everything.
How'd you do it? Did you ask in person? Did you text him? Did you call him?
My roommate, asked Laura. I said, hey, I can't do this alone. Can you hold my hand for a little while? And she said, of course. And I will never forget that. And her kindness and her belief in me over the last few years truly have changed my life for the better.
Because we all need to be held.
Yeah. We all need help. We all need to be held.
Yeah.
No matter how we show up.
So first steps are realizing where you are and asking for help.
Yeah. The general consensus.
Nice. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Asher. If you enjoyed this podcast, we're going to be back. We don't know when, and we don't know who's going to be here, but this is a local Chattanooga podcast. We are filming it here in Common House, and we want to talk to you. If you have a story that you want to share, and it can be about anything. It can be about something sad. It can be about something funny. As long as it changed you in some way, you get to tell your story. So reach out to us. You can find us at bridge_the_gap on Instagram. And you can find more information about the podcast overall at gravellot.pro/bridge_the_gap. So thank you, Regina, for bringing your beautiful gifts and talents and all of the hard work and emotional labor that you have put in to birthing this incredible creation that has helped so many people. And big thanks to Asher for being behind the scenes and keeping us on track. And thank you to me for showing up today exactly as I am and being brave.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to
yes.
that.
We did it, guys.
That was fun.